Hello, everyone. Welcome to yours and my favorite part of the week. That's right, it's your online health psychology course, and I'm here to walk you through the hottest topics in health promotion. Now, a lot of this information, or at least some of the constructs, will be very similar. We've talked about them before, and the critiques are a little similar. However, we're going to be introducing new constructs, specifically community psychology. Will kind of be a big focus within this chapter. All right, with that said, let's jump into it. Beginning with an operational definition of health promotion. Any event, process, or activity that facilitates the protection or improvement of the health status of individuals, groups, communities, or populations. The objective is to prolong life and to improve quality of life. That is, to prevent or reduce the effects of impaired physical and or mental health in those individuals who are directly, such as patients, or indirectly carers affected. Health promotion practice is often shaped by how health is conceptualized. So beginning with that kind of final bullet point, kind of straightforward, but something you don't always think about is, and we've talked about before in previous chapters, is that how you're going to conceptualize a construct is going to impact how you measure it, and also kind of what your general goals are. So in this case here, how you conceptualize health, what does health mean, is going to influence the interventions and the specific markers of success that allows you to evaluate a particular health promotion program. So here we kind of have a very broad definition, including kind of a protection or reduction of kind of whatever, just broadly negative effects of health, with the idea of protecting individuals, groups, communities, and populations. So going from the individual level all the way to neighborhood groups to country, world, whatever, however you want to define population. Now, one seminal charter, at least for kind of the nerds who follow this, is the Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion. This charter recognized that this process of health promotion requires the strengthening of skills and capabilities of individuals, communities, and social groups. It involves building a healthy public policy, creating supportive environments, strengthening community actions, developing personal skills, and reorienting health services. The charter acknowledged that health is a resource for everyday life, not the object for living. Prerequisites for this state of well-being should include peace, shelter, education, food, income, stable ecosystem, sustainable resources, social justice, and equity. So this framework, this charter, stressing that it's not just healthy people in isolation, but rather healthy environments, fostering healthy people, and having that beautiful dynamic process when we're healthy people we're helping design and create and reinforce health structures and public policies in their overall environments, and those environments scaffolding, increasing the probability of positive health-related behaviors within a given environment. So kind of consequently, it's not just health is not, according to this charter, not just like this end goal in itself, like this very maybe hyper individualized end goal, but rather kind of an ecosystem, a healthy ecosystem wherein people can draw resources to promote health related behaviors. So whatever, it can be food, stable income, healthy communities, having local healthcare centers, or something even more, a little more abstract that you might not think of it, like something like festivals or something like that. It's kind of like these cultural and localized or whatever, countrywide, whatever, programs that bring people together and kind of increase kind of overall well-being in an equitable, just manner. To achieve the goals laid out in the charter, health promotion needs to advocate for health and create favorable social conditions, enable individuals to achieve their fullest health potential by reducing inequalities and ensuring equal opportunities, mediate between all sectors of society, and coordinate with people from all walks of life. So here, this kind of idea of health potential really kind of leveraging developmental psychology, the idea of a developmental potential wherein a person's is more likely and able to reach their full developmental potential when they live in environments that are healthy or optimized to their particular needs. And in this case here, health-related needs, those environments or those optimal environments would include those factors that we laid out in the previous slide. Again, kind of shelter, education, food, income. And why might some of those factors impact health? Well, kind of some of the arguments include, for example, education. Lack of education is associated with kind of lower levels of health literacy, which, as we talked about before, kind of decreases your ability to follow interventions just based on kind of literacy levels. But also it decreases your ability or kind of your confidence in interacting with your healthcare professional, kind of on a one-on-one level, which again kind of is associated with more adherence to health interventions and positive health outcomes. And then kind of even going further on that health literacy stage kind of theory we talked about last week, kind of the idea being that you can then high levels of health literacy kind of associated with kind of developing health programs locally or kind of advocating for whatever improved health overall. But lower education kind of decreases the ability to do so. And also education levels correlated with job status, and job status, especially in the United States, correlated with, for example, or certain jobs only give you access to healthcare. Not all jobs do so. And then stable ecosystem can mean many things, but for example, like just an unstable neighborhood, maybe a household with a neighborhood with like a lot of noise, something like that, just a compounding of instability in your neighborhood associated, which again, which we've reviewed before, higher levels of allostatic load, for example. So your environment, those stressors accumulating and kind of negatively impacting a whole host of physiological outcomes, which are in return associated with health outcomes. So thus the idea, creating environments wherein people can reach their full developmental/health potential. Early models focused primarily on disease prevention, that is, the biomedical model. While more recent health promotion models are influenced by the biopsychosocial model, that is biology, psychology, and social components, which takes into account, again, psychological and social determinants of health. So kind of moving beyond kind of just basic cellular stuff, which is or whatever, something like that, to biology, which is not to say that that's incorrect, but incorporating these other factors, which have also been found to be predictive of health-related behaviors. So again, kind of that more holistic approach to understanding health. And so if you, conversely, if you take a more holistic approach to understanding the determinants of health on you, then kind of take a more holistic approach to designing protective factors, that is factors, environmental factors within a particular environment that promotes positive health outcomes. Moving on to the behavioral change approach. The goal of the behavior change approach is to bring about changes in individual behavior through changes in their cognitions. This approach is based on the assumption that humans are rational decision makers. This approach relies heavily upon the provision of information about risks and benefits of certain behaviors. Synonymous with health education, as it aims to increase individuals' knowledge about the predictors of health and illness. So this is kind of almost, I wouldn't say the default approach, but maybe the most common, heuristically thought of kind of approach to psychology in general, but here health psychology. And again, this being kind of like, okay, you're working with individual people and you want them to change the way that they think about something. You're changing their cognitions, aka just broadly speaking, thoughts. So how they process things, why, investigating maybe why they cognitively evaluate something some way, but ultimately your goal is to shift the ways in which people think about things in order to improve behavior. So classic like cognitive behavioral therapy. So you have cognitive in the first part of the name, behavior in a second, and then that's applied to a therapeutic setting, but you can take this beyond therapy as well. So consequently, because people are rational decision makers and they kind of just need that information or at least heavily rely on it, kind of the idea of health education is to, well, give them that information about predictors of health and illness so then they can act accordingly. Now, one way that information is passed is through leaflets, mass and social media campaigns, visual displays, or one-on-one advice. Information is often presented as factual and attributed to an expert source. A systematic review found that published interventions that aim to explain behavior change and maintenance tend to focus mainly on motivation, self-regulation, resources, habits, and social influences. So because this is very kind of like fact-based, you're going to have a lot of like leaflets. You're going to get a piece of paper with like your information written on it, and that can obviously take different kind of visual forms depending on the targeted audience. But kind of a key component of this, because it's factual in nature, kind of the idea here is that you want to give those like facts a veneer of expert credibility. Thus, you like cited from whatever the expert institution or person is to give that information again more salience, with the goal being that people are more likely to act on an information given that it was vetted by that these are facts and they're from the experts. Like hashtag I fucking love science, like thing that we had in whatever that was, 2014, 15 thing. I think it still exists a little bit, but not so much now. So and then we have the systematic review and kind of different ways that you go about behavioral change through this approach is a big one, self-regulation. I am resisting the urge to drink my 5th beer today or something like that. Or I'm going to eat one less cookie. Or I'm going to force myself to exercise today. Those kind of things. I'm motivated to engage in health-related behavior and adjust kind of my daily habits, again, through some series of information and cognitive information, receiving expert information and kind of cognitively reframing my approach to health in general. And the big one is always social cognitive models and behavioral change. The SCM suggests that there's a close relationship between people's beliefs, attitudes, and their intentions to act in particular ways. Consequently, by bringing about changes in knowledge and beliefs, it is hoped to bring about behavioral change. However, we never know if those good intentions will cash out in their actual behavior, as quite frequently they do not. This is referred to as the attention-behavior gap. So as stated, there's this correlation between beliefs, attitudes, intentions. We are going to, as social cognition researchers, we're going to try and improve self-regulation, adjust habits, increase motivation through these kind of cognitive shifts and, again, information. With the goal being that if we can change a person's beliefs, their attitudes, then in return, that will change their behavior. But as we've talked about in previous chapters, there is a gap between the attention of a person, that is, I'm going to exercise, it's a new year, new me, I'm here to exercise, and their actual behavior, that is actually running that cardio X amount of times per week. So we get this divide between, maybe actually say we're successful, whatever. We have cognitively reframed or something like that. We have changed our motivation, maybe. So our intentions have shifted, our frameworks have shifted, but at the same time, our behavior, that's not directly at every time kind of resulting to long-term behavioral shifts, especially long-term behavioral shifts. You often kind of see short ones, but through time, people fall off. And then, of course, the question is, why? Is this model sufficient, insufficient, or something else going on? Is there another variable that should be added to it? All those kind of fun things. And ultimately a bit theoretical as well. A specific SCM model we're going to look at is the theory of planned behavior. We've covered this in previous chapters, but as a quick kind of refresher, kind of the idea of this theory, the adherents argue that a person's attitudes, subjective norms, like within society, or how they person interprets those norms, and their perceived control of their behavior, those 3 components come together to influence attention, and then in return, behavior, or I should say actual behavior, that is a person's social behavior, is most predicted by that behavioral attention. So you have attitudes, norms, and behavioral control coming together to generate your intention, and in return, intention predicts your actual behavior. So one just kind of a brief demonstration of this, an empirical study, was Giles in 2014, who used a TPB to develop an intervention to improve young people's motivations to breastfeed. Focus groups and questionnaires were administered to young people, measuring their cognitions around breastfeeding, so just kind of their general viewpoints. And then in return, those findings were integrated into a different, larger intervention school program. So we have this focus group, you have these questionnaires, and we're going to use that information to design a intervention school program. Now, for the intervention school program, questionnaires that included key components and of the TPB were administered to control and intervention schools. So we have new questionnaires that have a TPB framing and specific measurement questions, and they were administered to, again, sets of schools. Some schools, the intervention schools, received an intervention about breastfeeding, while the control groups kind of just received standard care / standard education. Nothing new was added. Whatever you were taught in school about breastfeeding, that's it. That's what you got. So we have intervention versus control group. Results from the research suggested that female pupils from the intervention group had increased intentions to breastfeed, improved their knowledge about breastfeeding, and had more positive attitudes and perception of subjective norms towards breastfeeding than those in the control group. So basically what they found was, again, they administered those questionnaires between the control schools and the intervention schools. Intervention schools received this program that educated students about breastfeeding. And results demonstrated that the children of the school who received information about, who received the intervention, were more likely to report positive attitudes and positive perceptions related to the norms associated with breastfeeding, and declared their intention to one day breastfeed as parents. And obviously, the next logical kind of step of this is theoretically like a longitudinal study wherein you follow these people throughout their lives and then see if they engage in this behavior. Because as we all know, I don't know if this still exists, but a DARE maybe still exists, drug abuse resistance education. As we all know in 5th grade, we all made that oath, and can't say that everybody's lived up to that oath. So just because you have that intention as a kid or sometime during high school, middle school, whatever, does not necessarily mean you're going to engage that behavior, 10 years from now or then. Moving on to SEM model that relies on fear, kind of a big one. Rudder et al. In 2014 reviewed 60 years of fear appeal research and concluded that fear tactics may not be the most appropriate strategy to promote healthy behavior. Brown and Whitting in 2014 argued that the use of fear tactics poses the potential risk of harming audiences who do not consent to being exposed to these campaigns and are unable to withdraw it. Lupton in 1995, and we're going to expand on this momentarily, argued that risk, this idea of risk, in contemporary society has come to replace the old-fashioned notion of sin. This is achieved through the practice of health risk appraisals and screening programs. So we have this big kind of systematic review, and this is consistent with most systematic reviews, that fear-based kind of intervention has very low, even within like the psychology field, to no, and can be negative at times, effects. It's not generally, and more a consensus, not accepted as the best method in which to try and attempt to change behavior. And then kind of our Brown and Whiting point here is kind of the argument that these fear kind of tactics, you're basically just literally trying to increase fear, increase some level of anxiety within people. And then theoretically, these are on billboards or on TV commercials or something like that. And you're like, some people are like, yeah, I don't want to see this shit. I can't really withdraw from it. You're just kind of just increasing overall stress. And again, it's stress that's not even for... an ends justify the means kind of situation, because the effect size associated with fear-based interventions are not strong, and again, not generally thought of as not the most optimal strategy to promote healthy behaviors. There is interesting research on why are some of the motivation for fear-based interventions. Peters in 2014 conducted semi-structured interviews with our favorite word, stakeholders, aka people who have power and money, in the Netherlands. The main reasons for using fear, according to this research, were to attract attention and to encourage audiences to reflect about risk. Those who are more closely involved in the developing and implementing interventions were convinced that fear arousal should be avoided, according to Peters' research. Often, they were unable to convince funders, however, who preferred the use of fear appeals in health risk communication. Non-researchers had difficulty understanding the research evidence about the use of fear tactics and the cognitive processes involved. So in this research by Peters, what we found was kind of a disconnect between researchers who were largely in favor of kind of avoiding fear arousal or fear-based campaigns, while funders were more likely to endorse this. With the idea being that fear will attract attention. You'll be like, oh, if you don't do this, you're going to die. And people, whatever, they don't want to die. They're acting rational, and they're going to see that and then listen and then change their ways. And when disputes were had between stakeholders and researchers, often they were unable to convince funders, and then the question is like, why? Why do these stakeholders, at least in this research, why do they want to use fear arousal when research suggests not to do this, especially when the entire theoretical framework of this is like, yeah, you give people facts and then they change. And then it's like, okay, well, the researchers are giving you the quote unquote facts, which a word you should not use. It's evidence in social sciences, but sure. We're giving you the facts, and now you don't listen, kind of in the irony situation. And the kindness interpretation is that there's some kind of misunderstanding. They're having difficulty understanding the evidence. And then other interpretations conclude that they have an interest for whatever ideological, political, economic, whatever social reason to want to engage in fear-based campaigns for whatever reason. Which leads us to the Lupton, or I should say Lupton, that's the magic of television, folks, a critique. In 1995, this critique, we covered it briefly, but to kind of expand on it a little bit here, that this kind of SCM models, broadly speaking, are kind of like faux patient empowerment by enabling individuals to make informed choices and to allow them to take more responsibility for their own health. So this is kind of basically the critique is like, oh, you're saying this is empowering them. Well, really, you're kind of just telling them to just change who they are or whatever, change the way they think, and it's their own kind of personal responsibility, and not keeping with something like the Ottawa Charter or whatever, wherein we're trying to create broader, healthier ecosystems alongside changing a person's particular behaviors. And then we already had this kind of idea that he likened the practices to religious confessions, wherein sins are confessed, judgment is passed, and penance is expected. Lupton pointed out that risk disclosure attributes ill health to personal characteristics, such as lack of willpower, laziness, or moral weakness. Those, quote, at risk become, quote, risk takers, who are responsible for their own ill health as well as its effect upon others and society as a whole. So kind of the argument here is that this framework, it can be prone to, when it's actually like interpreted and how it's like processed through society, prone to kind of this idea of a person who has done bad and the good people, or the sinners and the non-sinners, or the at risk and not at risk. Because ultimately you say this person is at risk of XYZ. The question is, why are they at risk of XYZ? And that's where it can get into, well, that person lacks willpower, they lack motivation, they lack attention, and very much, again, kind of individually based situation here. And consequently, that can be kind of like a social stigma can develop within the quote unquote people who are at risk, wherein they're at risk because of their own decisions. They are risk takers, they're harming themselves, they're harming society, and they're ignorant or something along those lines. Or somebody who has, sinned or something, secularly sinned, and they must be kind of ostracized by society. Consequently, Lupton argued that a risk discourse can have detrimental consequences for those positioned within it. Being labeled at risk can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, since people may feel reluctant to seek medical advice for fears of being reprimanded. It may give rise to fatalism, as well as anxiety, uncertainty, and fear. As for example, for women, quote, at risk of breast cancer, who can experience their, quote, at risk status as a halfway house between health and illness. So with kind of in that framework of at risk, transformed or shifted or extended to this idea of a risk taker who's at personal fault, that in return can contribute to an internalization by those quote unquote risk takers, and thus kind of act as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, oh, I am a risk taker, whatever, that's just who I am, and that's what I'm going to do. And then, you kind of like you're snowballing from there. Then we have this fatalism argument here, and this is really getting at a kind of like a liminal space between what it means to be at risk of a particular chronic condition, in this case, breast cancer, for example, And the question is basically like, what does it mean to the person who is at risk for a chronic illness? How do they process that? What does that mean to their identity? How does that impact their quote unquote daily lives, their hashtag lived experiences? In some forms that this can take is, increased anxiety of like all times, like, oh my God, if I do this thing, I'm at risk, I'm at risk, I'm at risk. I have, what do I do? And you're kind of like in this constant, you can be at this constant state of like, if I do anything wrong, I'm going to die, basically. You're stuck in this pure fatalism trap between health and illness, wherein you're at risk theoretically is supposed to mean that you don't have the condition now, and you can take changes to decrease your risk of not developing, and consequently not develop the condition. While here instead we kind of have like this liminal psychological torture space wherein we're actually not healthy because we've internalized this kind of anxiety through this kind of risk of framework is basically the critique here. Which brings us to kind of these classic critiques of behavioral change approaches. For example, it is unlikely behavioral change approaches alone are unlikely to target the possible more salient predictors of ill health. That is, individual behavior change, even when successfully implemented, cannot adequately address socioeconomic factors such as poverty, unemployment, or environmental pollution. Another critique is what behaviors should be targeted. Should public have a say? Disconnected outside. So kind of straightforward here with the first bullet point, environmental pollution. If you live in Cancer Alley, for example, which is like this 80 to 90 mile strip of land around the kind of Mississippi River. And it's just like super polluted areas. And research suggests that people who live around there just are at much greater risk of developing cancer than people who live outside that area due to like pollution. So, and those people, yes, you can like cognitively change the way they think or improve their intentions or, something along those lines, which, whatever, sure. Positive is kind of the critique there. But ultimately, you're still living in literally like Cancer Alley. It's like the name. You're living in like a cancer chamber. So that is consequently, those social cognitive models are insufficient to addressing the fact that you live in Cancer Alley and thus are at greater risk of developing cancer. Which also kind of brings us to like, how do you conceptualize at risk? Again, you can take multiple approaches. One of which is bifurcating it kind of crudely. One being kind of more personal approach or lazy, whatever, not motivated, versus like risk being like embedded within certain environmental systems. So in this case here, literally the air you breathe, pollution, which is predictive of a whole host of negative developmental outcomes. Then kind of our second kind of argument here is what behaviors should be targeted. So the question is like, who decides what behaviors should be targeted and where and why? So the kind of this critique includes that a group of experts basically disconnected from a group that is, we're going to use the at-risk frame here, at risk of whatever condition, and a person who's disconnected from that community completely comes in there. Some nerds. I walk into some place. I'm like, okay, here I'm gonna fix you. And so now it's like, okay, this disconnected outsider is here and trying to maybe who does not understand the norms, the conditions of this environment, and then just coming in here with like these new solutions that are basically disconnected from reality. So the question then is, what behaviors are targeted and who gets to say in what behaviors are targeted and why they're targeted? SCMs have also kind of been criticized as conceptualizing the individual as a rational decision maker and are often primarily concerned with conscious, cognitively mediated health behaviors, such as the decision to buy a smoke alarm. SCMs deprioritize the role of impulse and or emotion into account. Also, SCMs assume that the same variables are universally relevant to diverse groups of people. Information is not received or processed uniformly by those to whom it is directed. Mood, motivation, past experience, interests, perceived relevance, lay beliefs, group memberships, and many other factors mediate the way in which a message is, quote, heard and interpreted. So breaking down this briefly, with the first bullet point being here, we have, again, this kind of rational decision maker. We're making conscious, positively, cognitively frame decisions, and they're quite simple to do. So, such as like just buying a smoke alarm. Go to the store, buy a smoke alarm, you're healthier kind of idea. But this has been critiqued because, for example, emotions play a role into your decision making. It's not the same thing as just buying a smoke detector. In general, you don't really have an emotional valence or an ideological commitment to your smoke detector. It's just like, okay, I have a smoke detector, I'm gonna go buy the damn thing. Now, granted, when I play PlayStation 5 and I play with online, there's a lot of people who just let their smoke protector just beep all damn game, and those are the people you gotta mute. So even there, people, they ain't buying their smoke detector. But ultimately, the point being is that there are other factors that influence decision making rather than this conscious, deliberative, process. Also, kind of this idea of universally relevance to a diverse group of people. This could be a whole lecture in of itself. But kind of the idea here is groups of people have different past histories. They have their own personal and collective experiences that are rooted in their historical material reality. They have beliefs of what health means. How do you achieve health? That can vary and differ from the U.S. or something, your favorite U.S. university. So consequently, those kind of different operational definitions of health, those different values associated with health, and those different life histories of interacting with health institutions in their own country, in their own group, but also within the West, within the global North, within the U.S., impact how people, quote unquote, hear this information, how that information is processed, what does it mean to them, how is it interpreted, how much credibility is it, what should you take for it, all those, and are those specific variables even being targeted with an intervention, are those even valuable to those people? These things, all these kind of different factors and many more impact how people interpret those quote unquote facts, that information that you are rationally using to make a decision. The community development approach aims to improve and promote health by addressing socioeconomic and environmental determinants of health within the community. This framework or this approach recognizes the closer relationship between individual health and its social and material context, which consequently become the target for change. Over the past 20 years, there has emerged increasing interest in developing a community health psychology. Specifically, the American Psychological Association has a community health psychology division, and that is Division 27. The community development approach is defined as, quote, the theory and method of working with communities to combat disease and to promote health. Here, the title of the division and the area of psychology interest kind of tells you what it is they're interested in. Community psychology. So it is literally, kind of challenging the standard way that we think about, or lay people think about psychology. In this case here, again, another division, official division of the APA, wherein we're conceptualizing psychology as kind of this collective, community level science. And in this case, when it comes to health, using that, leveraging community health or community psychology in a health context to work with communities to combat diseases and ultimately promote health, design healthy communities, in keeping with the idea of kind of social determinants of health within a community. The community development approach, in fancy speak, constitutes the interface between the environmental and behavioral approaches to health promotion, and that is concerned with the ways in which collectivities can actively intervene to change their physical and social environment. The psychologist serves as an agent of change. A combinationist approach focuses on processes within the community, while more critical approaches aim to connect intra-community processes with the broader socio-political context. So in here, what we're getting at here with this first bullet point is that we're taking that idea of environmental and behavioral approaches, environmental, personal behavioral change, and kind of environmental, just the environment impacting all developmental health outcomes. We're combining it together. Now we have this idea of the community. That's, again, community psychology / the collective, behaviorally intervening. So changing their behavior, engaging in behavioral intervention, but as a collective to change their environments. It's kind of the idea here. And kind of two, again, bifurcated, crude, different categories. We have this accommodation approach with the idea kind of primarily focusing within the community. So really kind of, again, community-based, focusing on specific processes, players within the community, versus more critical approaches, wherein they're connecting those community processes to a larger socio-political context in the spirit of kind of Bronfenbrenner macro systems kind of things. And again, these kind of different approaches are going to also reflect your kind of theoretical, cultural, social, political, economic ideologies. So kind of looking at the big theoretical influences in community health psychology, they include Paulo Freire, who was born in 1910, lived about 80 years till 1990. Most famous for this idea of critical pedagogy, one is as heavily influencing community psychology. He was a Brazilian educator and engaged with students in this idea of active dialogue in a dialogical manner to encourage students to consider the broader social and structural restraints on their lives and how they can begin to challenge these through collective actions. He was known for his campaign and commitment to literacy campaigns as a terrain of social struggle. So this guy's working with in the slums of Brazil, basically. He was an educator, a very well-known educator, one of the most cited educators in world history. And he worked, again, kind of like in the many places, taught at like a university level, but also kind of most famously working in the slums of Brazil and multiple places. And kind of the idea is that the curriculum is rooted in your specific environmental context. So it's kind of investigation of how your particular environment influences you, and then leveraging that information to create a healthier kind of environment. And he called this kind of process through education, kind of the development of this critical consciousness. And consequently, he critiqued the banking model of education, wherein kind of the idea is that the expert comes along, they bestow upon you the knowledge of what you should know, what your learning goals are, how you'll be assessed, basically complete top down, while you are like a vase, you're a vessel, and I am filling that vessel with my knowledge or something along those lines. Or I'm just depositing my money in a bank or something like that. But ultimately, you aren't super involved in deciding that curriculum, and it consequently can be disconnected to your daily lives. So that's just a little brief picture of it, but this is a massive kind of like a theoretical pedagogical argument, and thus why this person is widely cited for people who agree and kind of disagree with him. There are many challenges, however, associated with community-based health interventions, including the fact that they tend to be a bit messier, less straightforward than planned, a little more chaotic. You could describe them as chaotic good. To the extent that is actually in any way a real construct. Community health psychologists are encouraged to explore alternatives to instrumental rationality and, quote, trust the process, and create mechanisms that enable people to decide on outcomes themselves. The community development approach, in fancy speak, constitutes the interface between the environmental and behavioral approaches to health promotion, and that is concerned with the ways in which collectivities can actively intervene to change their physical and social environment. The psychologist serves as an agent of change. A combinationist approach focuses on processes within the community, while more critical approaches aim to connect intra-community processes with the broader socio-political context. So in here, what we're getting at here with this first bullet point is that we're taking that idea of environmental and behavioral approaches, environmental, personal behavioral change, and kind of environmental, just the environment impacting all developmental health outcomes. We're combining it together. Now we have this idea of the community. That's, again, community psychology or / the collective, behaviorally intervening. So changing their behavior, engaging in behavioral intervention, but as a collective to change their environments. It's kind of the idea here. And kind of two, again, bifurcated, crude, different categories. We have this accommodation approach with the idea kind of primarily focusing within the community. So really kind of again, community-based, focusing on specific processes, players within the community, versus more critical approaches, wherein they're connecting those community processes to a larger socio-political context in the spirit of kind of Bronfenbrenner macro systems kind of things. And again, these kind of different approaches are going to also reflect your kind of theoretical, cultural, social, political, economic ideologies. So kind of looking at the big theoretical influences in community health psychology, they include Paulo Freire, who was born in 1910, lived about 80 years till 1990. Most famous for this idea of critical pedagogy, one is as heavily influencing community psychology. He was a Brazilian educator and engaged with students in this idea of active dialogue in a dialogical manner to encourage students to consider the broader social and structural restraints on their lives and how they can begin to challenge these through collective actions. He was known for his campaign and commitment to literacy campaigns as a terrain of social struggle. So this guy's working with in the slums of Brazil, basically. He was an educator, very well-known educator, one of the most cited educators in world history. And he worked again, kind of like in the many places, taught at like a university level, but also kind of most famously working in the slums of Brazil and multiple places. And kind of the idea is that the curriculum is rooted in your specific environmental context. So it's kind of investigation of how your particular environment influences you, and then leveraging that information to create a healthier kind of environment. And he called this kind of process through education, kind of the development of this critical consciousness. And consequently, he critiqued the banking model of education, wherein kind of the idea is that the expert comes along, they bestow upon you the knowledge of what you should know, what your learning goals are, how you'll be assessed, basically complete top down, while you are like a vase, you're a vessel, and I am filling that vessel with my knowledge or something along those lines. Or I'm just depositing my money in a bank or something like that. But ultimately, you aren't super involved in deciding that curriculum, and it consequently can be disconnected to your daily lives. So that's just a little brief picture of it, but this is a massive kind of like a theoretical pedagogical argument, and thus why this person is widely cited for people who agree and kind of disagree with him. There are many challenges, however, associated with community-based health interventions, including the fact that they tend to be a bit messier, less straightforward than planned, a little more chaotic. You could describe them as chaotic good. To the extent that it is actually in any way a real construct. Community health psychologists are encouraged to explore alternatives to instrumental rationality and, quote, trust the process, and create mechanisms that enable people to decide on outcomes themselves. Following that critique, Barrow proposed kind of three elements to kind of a more liberation-minded psychology, especially in the global south. That is a new horizon. Psychology must stop focusing on itself and being concerned about its scientific and social status, but rather focus on the needs of the masses. It's kind of stopping there. So this is also during a period of a shift towards kind of cognitive psychology, but even before that, kind of the behavioralism was like a big thing, kind of like Skinner and stuff like that. Like this very hyper obsession, which came out of just a brief history of kind of Western, quote unquote, and this is crudely stated, not really fully accurate, but we have kind of this idea of like Freud and then this kind of like subjective science. And then out of that is like, no, we need to be more scientific. So then came Skinner or whatever. And we're like, psychology is super obsessed with just like being a science kind of idea here. So in that context, basically, he's critiquing this idea of like pursuit of this idea of psychology as a credible science at the expense of all else, and primarily at the expense of not designing and thinking psychology through a framework in which that you can basically help people. And in this case here, needs of masses, particularly those, again, come emerging out of colonialism. Consequently, a need for new epistemology. Psychology needs to consider what psychosocial processes look like from the perspective of the oppressed population. So again, kind of working in that Freire model, kind of working with people to understand their perspectives, because their perspectives are going to inform you about the challenges within that community, and also kind of their what works and kind of changing their behaviors on whatever the intervention is that you are targeting. And then finally, this idea of a new praxis. Psychology needs to consider itself as, quote, an activity of transforming reality that will let us know not only about what is, but also about what is not, by which we may try to orient ourselves toward what ought to be. Kind of a nice quote, but kind of the idea here, again, in that context, again, these people are emerging from colonialism, quite poor, are accessing new forms of power to the extent that they can for the first time. And the idea is like, hey, we need to like create a country. Like we need to create like a world. So thus, you need to transform reality. You need to transform your environmental conditions. And through that kind of framework of transformation, you will allow you to kind of explore what environmental factors currently impact your health, your developmental outcomes, but also kind of imagine and theoretically work towards creating a healthier world or something along those lines. Now, how likely that is, granted, this guy also got murdered. So he was a psychologist who literally died for his kind of beliefs. So more recent examples of this include South Africa and other global South countries, revitalizing community psychology in terms of social political projects. So projects concerned with the health challenges faced by indigenous people and also the issues of colonialism and post-colonialism. In a systematic review, Samuel in 2014 explores the idea of social capital concepts related to health education and promotion. The systematic review found that trustworthiness, neighborly reciprocity, reporting a good sense of community, neighborhood collective efficacy, and behavioral social norms were consistently associated with health promoting behaviors. So we've talked about indigenous health in previous chapters, this idea of them being connected to their culture, feeling a sense of political and social empowerment, being correlated with positive health outcomes, and kind of the idea here. And that is kind of an example, kind of just reframing that research into terms of like community psychology. So kind of directly empowering people and to create new worlds, theoretically a healthier world that is rooted in kind of their cultural history. And then we have this social capital, again, just kind of demonstrating the impact of community on health outcomes. In this case here, neighborhood reciprocity. So having someone that you can depend on in your neighborhood, not I wouldn't say a dominant feature of the United States, but a thing that is predictive of health outcomes. So that sense of community, trustworthiness, in belief that your neighborhood, your people are kind of are capable of achieving, in designing kind of a healthier context, all associated with positive health outcomes. Expanding on the empirical research within this approach to health promoting behaviors, community participation in health promotion can involve various community members. In the process, it is not just about community leaders and activists. De La Yegas and Portis 2016 described how enabling farmers to develop their knowledge and skills to think, communicate, decide, and act upon their knowledge can help to successfully promote actions on malaria control among marginalized rural communities in the Philippines. So here we have working with just local farmers within kind of a rural areas. Rural areas typically tend to be underdeveloped, often higher rates of poverty within in more rural areas for a whole host of historical reasons we're not going to get into at this moment. But here we have researchers kind of working with farmers, wherein they are trying to improve their communication skills, their thinking skills, but also empowering them to act upon and decide how to design this intervention and kind of promote this intervention within the Philippines. In this case here, increasing adherence to practices that prevent malaria. So here, again, kind of working directly with this population to increase positive medical or health-related behaviors, again, controlling for malaria. Nakiwala in 2016 demonstrated children could be actively involved as partners in malaria education in Uganda. Children acted as health messengers and offered peer support and environmental management, increased children's knowledge about malaria, improved their self-esteem, and developed their communications. And malaria definitely matters because something around, depending on the number of the measurement, over 500,000 people die from malaria every year. So in this case here, we're involving kind of school children, and school children are acting as health messengers. So kind of socially supporting each other, kind of building that social bond, allowing each other to engage in healthy malaria prevention strategies within their schools, and maybe engaging kind of environmental management around their school and in their neighborhoods, and also kind of bringing that kind of knowledge home with them. So developing their communication skills, giving them this, increasing their sense of self-efficacy, and then kind of building up their general knowledge about malaria. So that combination of general knowledge about how malaria is transmitted, just general background information about it, while at the same time empowering those people to take actions with themselves and as a kind of collective, which is again very important within an African cultural context, as reviewed in previous chapters. Some other fun research that has been conducted. One was in barbershops. In Phoenix, Arizona in 2011, Davis demonstrated how barbershops can be used as a setting to improve health literacy and knowledge about the screening, treatment, and control of high blood pressure among Black American barber owners and their clients. So kind of going, ultimately here, you're in the community. You're embedded in this is what it means to be embedded in the community, research-wise, or health promotion-wise, whatever form this takes. Here, kind of working with Black Americans directly on the ground to promote information, screening, and treatment related to high blood pressure. Other contexts that can build social capital include like play groups. So parents bring their children together, for example, and the children or whatever, they're playing or doing their thing. They're hitting the gritty. And then they're getting brain damage from TikTok. They're having a good time. And then parents are talking to each other or whatever. You're building ultimately though a network of people that you can trust and hopefully and depend on, and thus theoretically that social support, that social network, contributing to your own increase in your own positive health related behaviors, and again, kind of working together as a community to maybe, build something or design some kind of healthy, health related institution within your community. Also, we have this idea of men's sheds, which is a term that frankly I never had heard until I read this research. It sounds like man cave, which is also kind of an embarrassing term, but whatever. These are community spaces that enable men to participate in a range, shared activities and interests in an inclusive and friendly environment. So ultimately, though, as we've seen with men, women's studies, an area where or a dedicated space wherein people can engage in shared activities and interests, and again, build that social connection, build that bond, and with it, improve personal and collective health outcomes. A systematic review by Harris in 2016 on the use of participatory methods in health research has shown that sustained community involvement enable better identification of the components of complex intervention. Now, this can be related to maybe a high amount of ecological validity within that intervention. That is validity, high level of validity that's like rooted in the conditions of that community. So basically, it's very relevant to their community. It's ecologically valid. So in this case here, maybe that participatory research worked. You got this input from these people. They that insight allowed you to design a more effective intervention. And because of that, there is a greater buy-in and more sustained buy-in from the community, which again can be leveraged to encourage each other to engage in these health-related behaviors and be a valuable resource. So if you have any questions or something like that, you're like, oh, this person is also involved in this thing. They understand it. What do I do? So you just have more kind of resources to depend on. You have that more of that social capital. Participatory research process also enables capacity building and participation among community members to take control of their lives, issues that impact their lives. So greater participation among community members, kind of all straightforward positive things. You have people who are involved in a community, take an interest in the community, and not just have the intention to do so, but are actually doing so. And that is kind of when there's opportunities for change to occur. Also, social participation has been associated with a more positive physical health outcomes. So straightforward. We're a social being, social. So there's a whole host of theoretical interpretations of this, but ultimately we're a social species. Being around people, talking with people, working towards a common good, thought to be associated with positive health outcomes. Granted, it does depend on what the project that you're working towards, because there can be harmful collective projects, obviously, as well. Now, some critiques of this community approach. One, because of this, its applied and translational nature, it is often kind of inherently political or cultural or economic, social, kind of macro, basically, in general. And if you don't want to deal with that, or you think that's not appropriate for whatever this field, then it's like, okay, well, you're out. This is not a valid kind of approach. It involves the collective organization of those who are traditionally excluded from decision-making processes, which can put pressure on power relations. So participatory research is literally designed to bring people into the research process or intervention process, health-related process that are traditionally excluded, and thus maybe they're stepping on people's toes, but ultimately theoretically there's a reason why people are excluded. There's going to be a psychology behind that, a reasoning why. It can be good reasoning, bad reason, but whatever. There's a reasoning, and this participatory framework can put pressure on that reasoning, those power relations that exist, which can be met with but possible resistance for whatever reason that group is excluded. There's potential to come in conflict of interest. So relatedly, maybe the community wants something done, but for whatever reason, someone of more power or something like that doesn't want it to be done, and then you have this conflict. So there's theoretically more conflict. And social pressure, and in general, researchers, academics are kind of really a bit of conflict avoidant, a little bit. Really not going to rock the boat that much. It's a global statement, obviously. These participatory researchers exist. Relatedly, is vulnerable to a lack of public funding. So maybe because it's the trials, the interventions are a little bit more messy, less standardized, a little maybe more moonshot. This could be decrease the probability of receiving public funding, because maybe there's less exact markers of this X% changed, Y% changed. These were our learning outcomes. And did you achieve them? Did you not achieve them? So this kind of, you could call it ambiguity, but they would call it a different scientific approach that is not supported by traditionally Global North, especially funding institutions. So thus kind of engaging in this research could decrease your subject to maybe decline in public funding. But just in general, there's a general this type of research gets much less funding than kind of more systematic, maybe bio or neuro or genetic kind of based research. So theoretically, maybe more work, more pressure, less funding. It's almost impossible to run trials using match control conditions and bottom-up interventions. So it's difficult to have kind of control groups, because you literally can't be all right, kids, you were born, now I'm going to put you in poverty. Okay, kids, I'm going to put you here. Can't really do that. So it's kind of a little more messy, because it's rooted in kind of the reality. It's not rooted in kind of a research lab predominantly. It's much more on the ground based. Or for our stats heads out there, you don't need to know this, lower degree of internal validity, theoretically higher levels of external validity. Well, Knowles in 2014 encouraged community health psychologists to engage with the messiness of practice and argued for a, quote, journey approach to collective action. We love a journey. It's one of our favorite pop psychology phrases. We love a journey. So now we're going to take that journey and embrace that messiness. So since community health psychologists work with vulnerable groups, Knowles argued, and usually within multidisciplinary teams, it's important for the field to widen its research agenda and to be more open to interdisciplinary dialogue, have implications for the research choices we make, who we choose to work with, and who remains neglected. So kind of the idea here is Knowles is arguing, hey, we love a journey, and also this needs to health promotion, health psychology, and psychologists whole and community health psychologists need to take an interdisciplinary approach, work with other fields to design interventions, because again, leveraging health onion, macro systems, all these things, health is impacted by many environmental factors. Now let's talk about how health promotion is evaluated. There's an outcome evaluation, that is assessment of changes brought about by the intervention, and the process evaluation, understanding of how and why the intervention worked. In recent years, increasing emphasis has been placed upon evaluation and the need for evidence-based health promotions. Evaluations of health promotion interventions can be complex, as some interventions may require multiple components involving several partners, contexts, target groups, and behaviors. So kind of a couple pathways here that you want to evaluate. One, what the hell happened? Did it work? What changes were accomplished or not accomplished? So just what happened, basically. What is the outcome? And then the process evaluation, arguably, is more important, of how did this happen? Why did it happen? It's not just, okay, this thing magically works, because the idea here is that you want to know how to apply it to other contexts and replicate it to the extent that it is successful. And again, especially because big funders want kind of like these concrete, like evidence-based promotions and ways to evaluate them, these kind of promotions, evaluations, have led to the creation of frameworks that allow people to theoretically evaluate their health promotion programs. But even in these cases, it's quite difficult because health is complex. You're working with, and especially if you're on the ground, and you're in a interdisciplinary team, you have all kinds of different things being tried with different people, and it's difficult to measure all these things and kind of disentangle what is happening and why, and let alone applying that, what you learn, to different contexts. Which leads us to the RE-AIM framework, a very, again, popular framework if you're a nerd in this field. This was developed by Glasgow in 1999, which is a great last name. Love Glasgow. Been there, love Glasgow. But anyway, RE-AIM, I should say, stands for reach. That is the absolute number, proportion, or representativeness of individuals who participate in a given initiative, intervention, or program. So how many people you're reaching? Kind of straightforward here. Effectiveness and efficacy, impact on the intervention, on important outcomes, including potential negative outcomes, quality of life, and economic outcomes. So how effective is it? What's being changed? Just improving their overall well-being of life? Is it making it worse? Whatever. How effective is it? Adoption. This is the absolute number, proportion, and representativeness of settings and staff who are willing to initiate a program or improve the policy. So it's not just how many people can you theoretically reach, it's how many people are actually going to participate, and importantly, how many staff members, how many institutions are actually going to participate in this program. If that number is 0, then you're kind of in trouble, even if you could theoretically reach a lot of people. Implementation. This is at the setting level. How closely do staff members provide the program that developers provide, including consistency of delivery as intended in the time and cost of the program. So this can be challenging because, especially in kind of when you're working with lay people, kind of following a protocol can be difficult at times, because it's like, okay, well, why don't I just change the protocol a little bit? Well, the challenge with that is like, okay, well, now you're running a different protocol than someone else. So it's kind of, now it's difficult to disentangle. You're adding a new variable level of uncertainty to interpret what is working and why it's working and what our actual results are. So implementation, again, kind of consistency on delivering what it is that we say we're delivering. And is it meeting like time and cost requirements? Because all these kind of funding mechanisms require you or give you X amount of time, and Y amount of cost. Are you overrunning it? Are you moving too fast, etc.? And finally, maintenance at the setting level. This is the extent to which a program or policy becomes part of the routine organizational practices and policies. At the individual level, this refers to the long-term effects of a program on outcomes after 6 months follow-up or more. So kind of maintenance here at the institutional level. Do these practices get like incorporated within the institution? Do they become part of the everyday routine, the program, the policy, whatever? Or is it this kind of flash in a pan, you have to do this for a few months and then you move on with your life? Like, oh, the inspector's here, I have to do this, and now I don't care anymore. It's kind of the idea here. Then at the individual level, it's what are the long-term effects? Can you sustain this kind of intervention? As we talked about, you can find effects in the short term, but once you get further away, 6 months, those effects fall dramatically across research. So how can we maintain those effects beyond for a long-term behavioral change is the question. And this, again, one method of which you can evaluate your intervention through this RE-AIM framework. This framework has been used for a wide range of health promotions, interventions, and there are hundreds of publications that have used this framework. More recently, it has been used to support the development of interventions and to translate research into practice. This is obviously not an easy task. Failure to translate research evidence into practice and policy is not uncommon in clinical or health services. So even if you find something that works, and there's a lot of consensuses that exist in developmental psychology, for example, but those are not actually translated into policy or practice at a healthcare practitioner or whatever university or whatever social institution that exists. So making that, putting into practice, translating from what the state of science is, the current consensus is, to actual kind of real world changes within institutions, a quite difficult process for a whole host of reasons. To bridge the evidence practice gap, Klenner in 2014 recommended that conceptions of health promotions evidence need to be expanded. They quote, relationship-based methods need to be harnessed to enable practitioners to document community interactions and to use these as research evidence. It requires developing organizational capacity to enhance practitioner skills. So through this process of evaluation, piloting, development of research, and implementation, kind of the idea here is this is how you're going to bridge this evidence practice gap. Again, the idea being that there's consensus on the current evidence and how does this get translated to practice. In this case here, just practice through a healthcare professional. And again, easier said than done. These kind of programs require resources, being embedded in the community, having practitioners be familiar with research, especially research that is embedded wherever it is that they are working. It can be quite difficult. But ultimately, the goal is to take our best evidence that we have and embed that within daily practices within practitioners and institutions. Moving on to our final construct we're going to talk about here is this idea of healthism. This healthism assumes kind of three properties, it's argued, and that is good health is a universally shared objective. There's an agreement on what being healthy means, and there's a scientific consensus about which behaviors facilitate good health. The real and maybe only challenge for health experts and educators is to find effective ways of helping people to maximize their health, according to this framework. Crawford in 1980 argues that this is an ideology that situates health and disease within the context of the individual. That is, healthiest ideas, according to Crawford, could lead to the medicalization of everyday life and reinforce personal responsibility for health. So kind of our big assumptions here is that health is a shared objective. And part of that is like, what is actual health? What does being healthy mean? And does health mean at all time maximizing the probability of your own personal health at all expense of anything else? Is it all about kind of you? For example, this could exclude something like a personal act of like sacrifice or something like that as quote unquote unhealthy behavior, when really within that context, within that culture, within that group, for that person, whatever, they are saying it as, no, this is bigger than my own immediate health needs. This represents something larger than me, maybe the health of the world, of people, or some kind of construct a collective that they believe in, or principle that they stand for, something like that. You can imagine like a hunger strike or something like that. And then we have number three is basically the idea that there's just a pure scientific consensus across all behaviors on what facilitates good health, and that is not exactly the case. But if you assume that, kind of the idea here is in that you just basically get health experts and educators to come together and just maximize health outcomes across all people at all times, and you have to define universally what those health outcomes are based on how you define what good health is. And kind of the social implication of what Crawford is arguing is that basically this medicalization of everyday life, and we're going to get to another argument momentarily, but kind of the idea is that now all of a sudden you're creating a group of people, a population, a citizenry who has kind of completely medicalized their life. Every second of their day is kind of thinking about, okay, what if I'm doing is healthy, or am I not being healthy right now, which maybe can contribute to guilt, but at the same time, maybe something like, oh, I'm being healthy, those other people aren't being healthy, I'm better than that person. But kind of like ultimately like this collective like neurosis of like health obsession at a very introspective, personal, like individual level. Ultimately kind of like an obsession with like the self and like mass neurosis is basically kind of this argument and another argument we'll get to momentarily. which leads us to Evans, a very famous classic researcher here. In 1988, argued that such an ideology can also begin to drive health promotion interventions that instead ought to be informed by scientific evidence, both biomedical and psychosocial. Quote, according to Evans, increasingly promoting presumably non-risky behaviors, we may be contributing to a type of mass hypochondrias, resulting in an increasingly diminished freedom in human lifestyle and quality of life. Can result in an unhealthy obsession with exercise, an inability to enjoy a meal, as well as a reduction in spontaneity of lifestyle. Now, kind of supporting this argument, actually, numerous researchers, but most recently in 2024, Canadian Pediatricians Society, arguing that children should be taking more risk-related behavior. That risk is inherently a part of kind of development, and people have to kind of take risks, obviously, within reason. And Evans is basically arguing, like, kind of within that frame, that kind of this obsession with health, everyday, massive evaluation of like health at all times. These overall just kind of lifestyle choices, kind of resulting in this creation of this mass hypochondria, where again, every single second documenting what needs to be done. Monitoring our in this case, 1988 doesn't exist, but in this context, monitoring our smart watches or something like that, or Fitbits and all that stuff. Really just kind of giving you sets of chores that you have to do, and which you probably aren't healthily engaging in. It's just kind of like maybe an anxiety that you have to perform, rather than health being something that you enjoy doing, that increases kind of your well-being, that opens you up the potential to engage in behaviors that are most beneficial to you, that are positive. And consequently, without that, kind of an unhealthy obsessions can occur through exercise or kind of eating disorders, and kind of reduction of kind of the magic of the spontaneity of life. So let's walk through some empirical research related to kind of this theoretical argument, then we can wrap it up here. So Lee and McDonald in 2010 explored how healthiest discourses are maintained through young people's experiences in school physical education, that is PE. Lee and McDonald interviewed rural young women, examined these alongside discourses from their school PE head of department. Results suggested that healthiest discourses were evident in the way the participants discussed physical activity, health, fitness, and their bodies. Health and fitness were constructed as important elements and enable them to control body shape and to conform to the ideal feminine appearance. So kind of the idea here, a social effect of this kind of framework is argued, and this is a critique framework of healthiest frame, is kind of this idea of how ultimately are we defining health, and what are the consequences of that? So in this case here, we're interviewing rural young women and asking them about, why are you exercising? What's the point of PE? What's going on? What does health mean? And here what the students stress is that it allowed them to control their body shape and to conform to the ideal feminine appearance. So very much kind of rooted in kind of ideal body types, insecurity about body type, which is a risk factor for eating disorders. So you can almost see a lot of these kind of contrasts we talked about coming together, very much focus on your individual appearance in this case here. And the only way that you are thinking about the outside world is how is the other outside world kind of judging you. So that kind of kind of creating, socializing a stigma that is internalized. And now the point of health and thinking about health related behaviors and eating exercises is kind of takes more of a pathological form. And you can conceptualize, extending this a little bit, how maybe young girls can use those different forms of health that they internalize to police each other, and then kind of create kind of this toxic sub school culture of unhealthy kind of body image, thoughts, and exercise and eating habits.